At the end of 2023, by many accounts, the Tier 2 nations had outdone themselves at the Rugby World Cup, Fiji beating Australia, and Uruguay running France and Italy close, being 10 points up on Italy at half-time, to name a few. But World Rugby have decided to leave them in the dust, by not only helping the Tier 1 from a closed-shop league until 2032, but also by going against them when it comes to World Cup qualifying. World Rugby, you need to fix this. The main issue is this god-awful World League, or whatever they're calling it, idea, which will see the Six Nations sides, Sanzar, and a couple of invitational sides, most likely Japan and Fiji, playing a tournament across the July and November internationals every 2 years, missing the Lions and World Cup years. Now, honestly, I have no problem with some kind of tournament idea, but the way it's being done is what I have an issue with. There will be no relegation until 2023, and the second division is to be set up by World Rugby, whereas the top division is owned by the Six Nations and Sanzar. The format hasn't officially been confirmed, but the rumours are there will be 2 pools, one with the Six Nations teams and one with the Rugby Championship teams and the invited teams, with the Six Nations teams travelling for the July internationals for 3 tests against the Sanzar teams, and the Sanzar teams travelling to the Six Nations teams for the 3 tests in November internationals. This is stupid. First of all, they say no relegation until 2023, but there's no requirement for them to ever do this, and considering the URC, Super Rugby and the Premiership currently don't have relegation, I can't say that I'm convinced that the unions will support this when it comes around. There will also likely be no revenue split between the 2 divisions if it does happen, which means the teams coming up will most likely go straight back down with no way to help improve themselves. I think there's a better option for something like this other than the format that has been rumoured. I first heard about this from the Overlap Rugby podcast a few years ago, and I think it's a great idea. And on a side note, please come back, you were great. Instead of having this pools thing with the Six Nations Rugby Championship, why not base it on world rankings? You could have a wee tournament in November where the top 4 are in a pool in the next 5 to 8, 9 to 12, 13 to 16, and going all the way down to American Samoa in 112th, with the winner of each pool getting a little trophy and being promoted while the loser getting relegated. You could also swap between North and South if you wanted to, by having it in November one year and July the next, or something like that. It's just a smaller scale thing to bring more tension and excitement to these games. Not a big upheaval that will stop Tier 2 teams playing Tier 1 teams because every international window is taken up by a Tier 1 rugby tournament. It could even maybe be better to structure in groups of 3, and in the bye week each team could play someone from another division or something like that. Or at the very least, start the World League with Pro-Rel and have an equitable revenue split between Tier 1 and 2 nations. But overall, I really don't like how they're wanting to do this tournament. Now there's a hoopla with World Cup qualifying. With the World Cup expanding to 24 teams, proposals were put forward regarding the qualification process for the 12 teams that haven't already qualified through their placing in last year's World Cup. According to American Rugby News, the respective regions of World Rugby voted for qualification selection for 4 to Europe, 2 to Oceania, 2 to South America, 1 to North America, 1 to Africa, 1 to Asia, and 1 to an 8-team repechage, 5 to 1 in a vote. And of course that means World Rugby went for that process, right? That's what they chose, right? Well, no, what happened is World Rugby rejected this plan and changed it to 4 to Europe, 3 to the PNC, which we'll talk about in a second, 1 to South America, 1 to Asia, 1 to Africa, 1 to the PNC South America playoff, and 1 to a 4-team repechage before going to the approval panel. What exactly is the point of the voting if World Rugby is just going to do it their own way anyway? The losers in this scenario are South America, who are going to get 2 automatic spots, but they've lost 1 of those to have a playoff with the PNC. When I first saw the change, I thought, here we go, they've taken a spot off South America to make sure the USA qualify. But in the original version, the USA would likely have qualified anyway, seeing that North America got an automatic spot and Canada can't even beat an MLR team, so it was all but a given for the USA. It's also likely the South American 2 team will qualify through the playoff with the PNC, as that team would likely be Canada, which is where the most egregious change has happened. The PNC, which from now on will consist of Fiji, Japan, Samoa, Tonga, USA and Canada, will get 3 automatic spots and 1 playoff spot. Fiji and Japan have already qualified, meaning that the 3 of the other 4 teams will qualify straight into the World Cup, and the team that finishes bottom will get a playoff decider for the World Cup. No other closed shop competition in men's rugby gets a guaranteed spot into the World Cup. And the worst part is, if you look back at what they've proposed, there is no North American option, meaning there is no place for teams in North America outside of USA and Canada. World Rugby has completely abandoned the Caribbean and Mexico with this restructure. Now I know it's unlikely any of them would would qualify, but to not even get the opportunity? If that's how we're seeing it, why bother with African qualifiers and not waste anybody's time, just give the spot to Namibia? Because we all know they'll qualify anyway. It completely jeopardizes the sporting integrity of these qualifiers, but perhaps this was just an oversight on their part, and an extra qualifying round with South America too will be added before the PNC playoff match. But on a good note, World Rugby has organised the qualifiers to be done by November of 2025, so that World Rugby can help with investment into qualified teams to raise the standard of the lower nations in the World Cup. And it also gives us fans the information of who our teams will be playing 8 months earlier than previous tournaments. It will also hopefully mean that when the draw happens, we won't be seeing Europe 1 come out of the hat, and it'll be replaced with teams like Georgia or Spain if they don't do something to f up again. And now for the continued fiddling to rugby that World Rugby just can't help but do. Now, some of the law changes are interesting, like 1 stop for mauls instead of 2. I'm not necessarily pro this, but it could be interesting to see what it does. And there's also the change to the DuPont law, which we've seen recently, where teams have realised if a player moves 5 meters after collecting the ball from a kick, everyone is back on side. So defending players wouldn't have to retreat anymore, which saw us get this in the Six Nations between Scotland and France. They're changing that to force players to retreat, which is how it was previously officiated. There are some dumb proposals like no scrums from free kicks. This is just stupid. The scrum in and of itself is not an issue. The issue was around the time it takes to reset scrums. Scrums are amazing. They pull 16 players into one part of the pitch, which opens space out wide. Would you rather a scrum in the middle of the field where the ball comes out and the attack takes advantage of the space and run 40 meters up the pitch, or a team throw the ball sideline to sideline and not go anywhere, only to be shoved into touch or forced to kick on the defensive terms because there's no space? Now that's boring to watch. Also, this law change would remove my favourite law in the game, where you specifically can't score a drop goal from a scrum that was called from a free kick. You can learn more about that by watching this video right up here. It's up here, isn't it? The only upside I can see from this is that it might get more spiral bombs, which is always fun. Wait, hang on. What often is the outcome of a spiral bomb? And this next one is bemusing. Get this, they want to allow you to call the mark from a kickoff. Like, why? I assume that what they think will happen is teams will kick short and compete for the ball, but I think what will likely happen is they'll kick long, the opposition calls the mark, and we now have to wait for everyone to get in position, they kick for touch, they have a line out that will take 30 to 40 seconds to be thrown in, and now we're 2 minutes into a game and literally nothing has happened. Imagine it's a World Cup final, you're hyped for the game, we're all taking the piss out of our Irish mate because they got knocked out in the quarterfinals again. The anthems have been sung, and then that happens. How anticlimactic of a way to start a game is that? But this one is just a trial that is optional to partake in, so it's not mandated for everyone like the free kick rule changes. Now, World Rugby don't really have any control over the Champions Cup, but since I'm ranting, I'm going to throw this one in here anyway. The EPCR have made a complete mess of the Champions Cup since they took control of it in 2014. The value of the tournament has dropped by 1/3, and they lost the long-running title sponsor in Heineken. Now, there are some good elements to the current format, which is around qualifying for all leagues. The URC teams used to get in automatically because it was country-based instead of league-based, but the format of the comp is the league phase is so boring, I'm ecstatic that they're bringing pools back next season, even though it is pools of 3 and top 2 qualifying, so it will probably still be a bit boring anyway. And now there's these South African teams disrespecting the competition. No, I don't think they're doing that, but there's a lot to be said that the Bulls would rather prioritise the URC over the Champions Cup. The reduced prize money and the long travel to South Africa has meant that South African teams don't really have much reason to try other than pride, and is potentially showing that nostalgia is keeping this going with the European teams rather than anything material. And I don't think the EPCR has handled the introduction of the South African teams particularly well, making European teams like La Rochelle travel to South Africa and then back again to play a team who hasn't travelled at all is really not a good look for the tournament going forward. And there needs to be more care taken around player welfare when it comes to these long distances. My team Edinburgh travelled to South Africa for 2 URC games, travelled back played Bayonne at home, and then had to travel all the way back to play the Sharks again before coming back to play a game in the next weekend. They must have travelled nearly 40,000 kilometres in a month for these games. Is it really a shock that the Bulls played a B team when that's what they have to deal with? So how's the EPCR going to fix this issue? Well, by adding more travel by having a Club World Cup every 4 years. Isn't that fantastic? There's also recently been rumours that the EPCR now want to move semi-finals to neutral cities. We had an amazing weekend of European semi-finals this year, where Leinster sold out 82,000 seats in a stadium in a matter of hours, and they want to make semi-finals go to neutral cities. The only game that was in a neutral venue in these European semi-finals per se was the Sharks v Clermont, being played at the Twickenham Stoop because the South African teams aren't allowed to host semi-finals at the moment. The game was absolutely amazing, but the crowd was something to be desired. I think there's a way to make the Champions Cup better, and you can find more about that by watching this video right here. Thanks for watching.